All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Crystal Charlo Schaefer, and I'm the Director of Development here at Working Dogs for Conservation. Welcome to our final webinar in our Dog Days of Summer webinar series. It is also right in step with our Days of Giving, or DOG, campaign this week. So all donations are being matched, doubling your impact through tonight. So thank you to everyone for helping with this really exciting week for us. For everyone here, you're currently on mute, but feel free to put any questions in the chat throughout the talk, and then we'll get to those at the end. And then today we are presenting on 25 years of dogs and conservation. WD4C shares where we've been and where we're headed. So our speaker is our very own Working Dogs for Conservation co-founder and director of special projects, Amy Hurt. Take it away, Amy.
Hi, Crystal. Thanks everyone for being here. And yeah, as Crystal said, I'm going to talk about where we've been and where we're headed. And I'm not talking about, physically where we've been, although at this point, that list is growing to, a dozen countries and half the states, but rather, where we as an organization and the field of conservation dogs, uh, how we started up and how we're rolling along. So I'm going to talk about our history, mine, the organizations, and conservation detection dogs in general, and then talk about some of the changes and trends that I've seen over the last 25 years being involved in this, and then briefly just talk about thoughts on the next 25 years, and we'll see if my predictions come true. So let's get started with history. I'll tell you first a little bit more about me. So I'm Amy Hurt, as Crystal said. I'm one of the 4 co-founders of the organization. Um, I've worked with 3 primary dogs extensively on a bunch of different projects and have deployed with 17 other dogs on single projects here and there. I've been worked in 20 states and 12 countries and on 52 different targets. And then I've trained and consulted with several dozen other dogs and their handlers, both within our organization as we get new teams and uh, in external organizations as they get their programs rolling. And I did the math recently and I figured out that I've been deployed for about away from home and deployed for about 8.5 years over the last 25 years. So I recommend it as a good way to keep your marriage fresh and young. So how did I get involved from the get-go? And this is especially get involved with a field that did not exist until we came together as Working Dogs for Conservation, with a couple other collaborators and start this field. So when I was just a pup, like 20, 21, 22 years old, I was working in 1997 in the Bob Marshall Wilderness in the middle of Montana. And at that time, I was working for the Forest Service, and it just became the law that when you went into the backcountry, you had to contain your food in a way that bears couldn't get to it. And people were not very good at being compliant yet. And so a lot of bears were getting into camps and getting into trouble. And one bear in particular, the Forest Service called in Carrie Hunt. That's who's shown here with from Wind River Bear Institute and a couple of her Karelian bear dogs. And what Carrie does is she works with these dogs to systematically and safely kind of harass and haze them so that they have a negative experience when they come into people's camps and they're getting barked at and chased by these dogs that are bred to do this, and they learn to stay away. And something was like forming in my mind where I was really impressed with her partnership with her dogs. and this idea of wildlife and dogs, that we can do something for wildlife while working with our canine partners. And it just really appealed to me. And I didn't know where that would lead, but it was a little fire that got started in my mind and in my core. At the same time, in the 90s, for those of you who are around to remember the 90s, it wasn't, that's when like the TV show Friends got started and the OJ trial. But it was more than that. There's things happening in the science realm too. Dolly the sheep got cloned and the Human Genome Project started, and GPS that we rely on so much just became operational in the 90s. And one of the advances is that it became possible to get DNA out of scat. And so, in the interest of monitoring wildlife populations, there was this interest of, if we can get DNA out of scat, we can non invasively monitor wildlife populations. But how do we systematically and reliably find more scat so that we have sufficient data points to understand those populations? Some of the people who were contemplating this, like, wow, this is a great advance. What do we do with that? How do we find more scat? And I think dogs could be part of the solution. Were these four folks: Alice Whitelaw, Deb Smith, now Woollett, Megan Parker, and Sam Wasser. And Alice, Deb, and Megan will later become my co-founders. But in the mid 90s, Alice was a longtime carnivore field biologist and was part of the Fish and Wildlife Service crew that brought wolves back into Yellowstone. And Deb Smith was a dog trainer. She had worked for Guide Dogs for the Blind, bred and raised dogs, and was a canid researcher. And Megan Parker was a field researcher and also raised and grew up training dogs. And Sam Wasser is an endocrinologist and a professor, a chair at University of Washington. And together they were thinking about how to use dogs to systematically find more scat. And Megan, in particular, started calling up law enforcement officers, uh, trainers, saying, "Would you, I know you help train to find dogs find narcotics. Would you help us train them to find scat?" And she was getting laughed at a lot on the phone and told, "No way, lady. We try to keep our dogs from finding poop. We're not going to help you intentionally do it," until she found Barbara Davenport. And Barb was the lead trainer for Washington Department of Corrections and trained all of their program dogs for narcotics detection. And this is Barb imprinting a dog, teaching it an odor, and she's using a process that we still use, a variant of today, where there's a box in front of the dog with separate compartments and many holes in that box, and the scent is in one of those holes. And when the dog finds the correct scent, she throws the ball at the dog, and they quickly pair that that scent is going to result in their toy. And since they really like the toy, we're off to the races. So you can teach them to sniff out anything that they're not bred or inherently interested in, as long as you can use that toy reward. So Barb taught taught us her techniques, taught some dogs to find scat, bear scat being the first one. And one other thing that working with Barb initially infused into us is all the dogs in her program are rescue dogs out of the shelter community. And so that was just kind of a given, learning from Barb, that we would use a lot of rescue dogs in our program, and that has continued with us until this day. So here we are in 1998, Megan doing our first field work in North Cascades National Park. That black lab is Finney. He was a flunky from Barb's narcotics program, and the fun um, professional word for flunky is career change dog. So it means that they did not excel or it wasn't the best fit in their original job, and so they've been career changed into another job. This is the point where I get hooked up with the group because Megan had happened to reach out to my brother-in-law who owned a pet food distributorship and said, "Will you sponsor these dogs? Here's what we're trying to do: find wolf and bear scat in North Cascades National Park." And he's like, "Sure, have some dog food." And then he called me up and said, "Amy, you would think this is great what these people are doing." And I called Megan and she's like, "Absolutely, I could use your help in the field." And the rest is history. Um, that was a successful season. We found bear scat, not wolf scat, at that time. They hadn't quite come back in the park, um, but it was successful. At the end of this, Finney needed a home, so he came with me, and I learned to be his handler and was incorporated there ever after. And one fun little detail here is that Megan is holding kind of a long leash for bashing through the woods. And that's because we learned from a narcotics trainer, and the work is done on leash. And so we started with all those techniques and then said, this one works well, this one doesn't, and modified it over time. Pick some things from the search and rescue world where they work off leash much more regularly, and combined this into its own, like, here's how you start from scratch in the conservation dog training realm. So we no longer typically go bushwhacking with the dogs on a long line. After the initial work, Deb was going through her PhD program working with San Joaquin Kit Fox for several years. And so while we were starting to get some little bits of work here and there, we consistently at least had Deb's project where once a year each of us would have the opportunity to go bring our dogs there and work with her. And the dogs finding Kit Fox cat was just very successful. So there's a little bit of luck in like how incredibly successful that target is for the first dogs, because if the first couple things we tried were difficult sense, we probably would have thought this doesn't work very well. But it was a raging success, and so that really gave us the momentum to keep going forward. And so there we were a few years in, and it was in the year 2000 that we said, guys, I think we can make a go of this. And so here is our first iteration of our logo. And we formed a partnership and all kept having day jobs and going to school, but would have occasional projects to work on. So it's the four of us. It took us 10 or 12 years after we formed the organization to all be together in one place for a group photo all at the same time. But that's Megan, myself, Deb, and Alice. And then the first crack team of dogs were these three: Rio, who was a career change from police work because he didn't like to bite. Finney, I've told you about, and Camus was a dog of Alice's who she got as a puppy with intention of hunting and working with her to find animal sign until we assigned her to find specifically scat. Now, how our trajectory fits into conservation detection dogs, like the bigger story, the worldwide story, is what I'm going to talk about now, the history in general of the field. In the 1890s in New Zealand is where we know this got started. Um, they have endangered birds called kakapo, and a conservation officer used his dog Lassie to find these endangered birds, and then they were moved to an island that was predator free where they could be safe. So, and then that continued throughout Europe and North America, New Zealand, in the mid throughout the 1900s. But mostly that would be bird dogs helping to find birds, but rather than for hunting reasons, they were just finding them for research or management reasons. But it was always that kind of instinctual um, target, a dog bred for this, finding the thing that they were bred to find. In the late 90s, mid to late 90s, as I said, is when we could get DNA out of scat. And before the term conservation dog was used widely, we just talked about scat detection dogs. And that's when that came into play. But that needed this other type of dog. This dog that, there is no dog bred for scat finding like there is for finding birds. So we need a dog who really wants that toy and then they'll do anything for that toy. And this innovation of using those training techniques from other disciplines, bringing them into the conservation context and starting to use dogs in the conservation world that were not bred specifically for this. Like this is the innovation that made the field what it is today. This is the innovation that me and my colleagues brought to fore. Excuse me. Okay. So now we're in the early 2000s, and there's in the scientific literature, you see a lot of accounts of detection and accuracy rates of dogs trained to find scats of San Joaquin kit fox. That's some of Deb's studies. So we were either publishing or our dogs were working on a lot of what was published in those early days. Basically, we had to establish credibility in the field. Dogs can do this. They can find it, and here's how much they find when they search for it. This is me doing an undergraduate project. I'm presenting a poster on training dogs to distinguish between black bears and grizzly bear scat. And this ability to differentiate closely related species, we take for granted as a foundation of conservation dog work these days. But in the early 2000s, establishing that and getting that really basic information out there was where the field was at. Then yes, dogs can smell these things. Now, how do they compare to other ways that we've traditionally looked for wildlife? That was kind of the next phase, 2005 to 10, 11, 12. Most of what you see in the literature is kind of characterizing how do they do compared to other things. Um, and we see them finding on the left-hand side there, finding snakes faster, being really accurate, finding more of them, covering more area, more likely to detect presence of a species if they're there in the area than some other methods. So a lot of really good information coming out at that time, establishing that credibility. In 2021, a woman, Grim Seyfarth, and her team did a great review paper, and they published performance of what they call wildlife detection dogs compared to other methods. And of the 542 studies they looked at, 89% of them reported dogs performing better than other methods. Only 1% worse, and the other 10% kind of equal or mixed results. And while this is no doubt an overstatement of the percentage of times that dogs are better, because probably people wouldn't always bother to report if dogs didn't work well, it still is impressive that, by that time in 2020, there were 542 studies for her to analyze, and so the vast majority resulted in dogs doing better than other methods. And this is another table from that study, which shows the year, the parts of the world, and the number of publications about the use of dogs in research and conservation. And we see we're kind of cruising along. Remember those bird dogs, those instinctual dogs looking for their instinctual targets. We're kind of humming along at consistent rates. And then right here around 2000, when the innovation of training and working with dogs differently comes in, that's when the pink lines, the mammal studies just really start to spike, and all these other colors of different insects and reptiles and other things come into play, because now we have different kinds of dogs working for different motivations, so we can crack open that whole the whole new world. Now in the 2010s, the more taxa, like what we just saw in the graph, the taxa really just exploded, that dogs are used on. And by the 2020s, now we see a lot of use in like wind farm work, because they're getting incorporated. The use of dogs is getting incorporated into like written procedures of how to monitor for wildlife, certain wildlife species, or in certain um, management needs. And so it's no longer proving out like, well, would dogs be any good at this? But it's like, we know dogs are really good at this. And so let's use them more. And then I'll get to some other changes of what we're seeing now at this point in time. So here we are. Brings us up to our new grown up logo, and we go from the four of us starting the organization to 2005, when two of us could go full time. In 2012, we got an executive director, and 2025, we're around 20 staff. Programmatically, we as an organization work in these four different broad categories: ecological monitoring, that's our threatened and endangered species work typically; biosecurity, which is where like disease and invasive species comes in; ending wildlife crime. So we are one of the only organizations still that has a law enforcement uh, branch of our organization in anti-poaching efforts; and then environmental justice, which is not about the type of target, but instead is about ensuring that the populations most often harmed by environmental degradation have a seat at the table and are being assisted by our dog teams. We've worked on over 100 targets, and we have our on-staff dogs and handlers who go out and work on different projects. We also help start and mentor new programs, and we consult with existing programs who are maybe scratching their head over how to add wildlife targets to their narcotics program, for example, which is how we consulted in Kyrgyzstan when they wanted to add some trafficked wildlife onto their teams. Okay, water break, and then we'll move on to changes and trends. Okay, so some of the things I've seen over the last 25 plus years, when we started, it seemed like we were asked to help researchers differentiate species, like my undergraduate black bear from grizzly bear scat. They were like, what if you could find a bunch of scat and then dogs could sort it out. And for a hot minute, that seemed like something this field might do. And then, because also all other technologies are advancing at the same time, it became so cheap, like 10 to 20 bucks to send it to the lab and get your species differentiated. So then it's like, forget that. Dogs don't need to do that. They just need to be in the field, like finding more of those samples. Um, and now there's even some field going uh, DNA tests so that you can really rapidly find scat and go, yep, this is for sure from the species we're looking for. So I think it's neat to see how complementary things come along and then sort of change the way that we apply what dogs are working on. So I would say one big change is we are a long way from just just finding scat on the ground, but also we're really working on some very complicated detection and discrimination tasks. So one is disease, like we've been working on a sheep respiratory disease that is in both domestic sheep, where it's just like a cold and no big deal, but when they give it to bighorn sheep, it's often quite often fatal for them. And so we're seeing it from mucus samples, we can have the dogs differentiate the disease from non-diseased mucus to help managers know that when they're handling bighorn sheep, that their animal is healthy, or if it's not healthy, are they going to hold it back, keep it back from the rest of the population. And another hard thing is gene work. So the American chestnut was wiped out almost entirely in the middle of the last century, and um, there are now researchers trying to genetically modify chestnut seeds to be resistant to that blight that killed them off. And there's one gene in the chestnut's genome that they're modifying. And we want to see if dogs can sniff that one gene difference in a chestnut seed to help know, yes, this one successfully has the new gene that we want. So propagate these without having to slice into the seed and thereby expose it to um, mold and damage by slicing into it to test it. So these sorts of really detailed questions that we're asking the dogs to do have led us to work with different equipment. So this is Leo, and he is working on an olfactometer, which is a computer operated machine where there's several boxes, each with a port in there, and you put odors in the box, and the computer says, now it's time for box one to present the odor to the dog, and the other boxes will just present distractor odors. And there's a puff of air that comes out of the port into the dog's face, and the little metal things here have a laser, so the computer can keep track of how long he holds his head in there. And we tell the computer when this dog holds his head in here for 5 seconds, he is choosing that. And then the computer says, beep, yes, he did it correctly. And this way we can work with really small amounts of odor and keep it all very contaminant free, because in between rounds, the machine just blows clear air out through the apparatus. And so this is one of the new 25 years ago, we never would have seen this coming, but it was a box invented out of Texas Tech, and only a few entities in the States are using them, and we're just finding it a great help to these sort of difficult, detailed problems. However, Leo thinks this is great, but one this kind of work has led to changes in the kinds of dogs that we work with. Like we still have a place in our program for those hard charging, I want to run in the field and find this thing and go all day, and I'm super drivey for my ball dogs. Great, we got work for you. We still love you in our program, but those dogs don't tend to care for the olfactometers very much. And so, um, that like a softer, somewhat less drivey dog, they also have a place now in this world, to do more of that discrimination kind of work. Our emphasis on career change and rescue remains, but we just now have a broader type of qualities that we can work with in a dog. It's also opened up an opportunity for citizen science or community science. And this spring, we did our first community science webinar introduction and then put together a class of people from that webinar. I think, yeah, 9 participants in the class who came with their own dogs, and they learned to work on that olfactometer, which gives them a fun sort of sport-like activity to do with their dogs, and also helps us start to build a team of our community-based citizen scientists to help us work on some of those discrimination projects going forward. And in general, citizen science is both definitely an emerging trend over the last 25 years, and also something that is going to uh, broaden, I predict, over the next 25. Um, there's a lot of land out there and a lot of things that dogs could help find. And so really plugging in more people from the community into that work is going to be a great help for the field. There's new backgrounds, like more people are becoming conservation dog handlers. So when we used to hire, we could count on people having no experience. We were lucky if they had ever heard of conservation detection dogs, and it was all they would learn on the job, entirely apprentice model. Now we have on the left is a dog doing nose work. So that's a sport that's been developed over the last 25 years. And so now you have more regular people with their pet dogs understanding what for it. Because prior it used to just be like law enforcement, really, where you would do detection dog, but now you can do a detection sport. And on the right, Cindy's working on a wind farm, and that because it's wind farms, unfortunately strike birds and bats and kill them, and then they have to be monitored for how many birds and bats are being killed at the wind farm, and that's a regulatory requirement. And dogs are so much better than people at finding those bird and bat strikes. And so it's written into standard operating procedures to, if at all possible, use dogs to monitor wind farms. So there's a huge need for that. And I would say at this point, 75% of people coming into the field of conservation dogs got started with a wind farm background. So that really changes the rate at which new people can learn, and it's really starting to, I think the expertise of the field is growing faster than it ever has before. Finally, one more water break and a couple thoughts on the next 25. So as I said, people are coming in with experience now, and we had the opportunity in February of this year to collaborate with 2 other conservation dog organizations to host the first ever conservation canine community conference. And there were 80 people signed up. We had to turn people away, 16 presenters. And what is super gratifying to me is they all work in the conservation field. So all of the continuing ed and learning that we used to have to do of like, I'll take this piece from narcotics and this from search and rescue and this from bomb work. We were always learning and having to go, well, this applies and this doesn't. And here we had, over 80 people together who all know exactly what you're talking about. And like it's all about conservation dogs. And it was just incredibly gratifying. And I really see that arc of expertise where now when people coming into the field can stand on the shoulders of us and others that have come in after us, and they just get to start out at a higher level. And um, it's super gratifying. And I think it just speaks really well for the future of the entire field of conservation dogs. I do hope to see more integration with law enforcement. I mean, I myself wrote a technical book chapter 10 years ago, and I said, well, there's law enforcement dogs and there's conservation dogs, but like they're not the same thing. And the world though is just there's just been more interface between law enforcement and conservation, and I see that continuing. um, for one thing, there's a lot of tracking in the law enforcement like anti-poaching realm, and I think some of that could be applicable in uh, regular invasives and threatened and endangered monitoring. And there's super tangible, really understandable, positive outcomes from the law enforcement realm. When you get to stop an animal from being poached, that's a very tangible, major outcome. And I really want to see and think we are seeing more law enforcement integration, and I'm excited about that. Certification, there's as of yet no certifying body in North America. Europe and Australia are working on it. New Zealand has had one, but I think certification is going to grow, and that's kind of a necessary outcome from the all of those people. I'm excited about being in the field. Once you have more people, we need to have more standards and more understanding of what quality work and safe work and good animal welfare looks like. Working with more other technologies. I'm not techie enough to even imagine what this is going to look like. But right now, we already work in law enforcement with like smart game cameras that are very stealth. So you don't see that there's a camera there. They can recognize a human from an animal walking by and then say, aha, you don't want humans here, ping, send a message to the anti-poaching unit who can then respond really quickly. So AI is just gonna grow, but I don't even know how it's gonna grow. I'm excited to see how that happens. eDNA is environmental DNA, where you can take a sample of water or soil or something in the environment and get DNA from other animals that are using that environment. And that can work well with dog work. So I think there's going to be more of that complementary use. If you imagine like a wild pig that uses a wallow, well, a dog might go and find a wallow and have a change of behavior. They can smell urine, but there's no scat there for us to pick up. But now, having found that wallow by the dogs, we can do an eDNA test and see, aha, there is like pig DNA here. I think there's going to be more integration with other environmental consulting work right now, because it's a 24/7 lifelong commitment to have dogs and work with them. Everyone who's in the dog field pretty much only does dog work. And I think that there's going to be a demand for more entities who we can offer you dog services, but we can also work with other methodologies as well. I think disease is going to continue to be big. Um, the One Health, recognizing that we're all related. The health of our environment and animals and human health is all related. I think is going to mean that disease work continues. I think as there are more dogs in the field, there's going to be more opportunity for like single target dogs where it's like my dog knows bats and birds and that's it. And they are so good at it because that's the one thing they've been working on for 10 years. And I think that there are some targets that would be great for dogs to be able to focus on that. And I think now that there's more dogs doing this, it's going to be possible. And as more people get into the field, there's more opportunity to train trainers and train the next generation and not necessarily have to do the field work to be involved in this field. I'm really hopeful to see additional standard operating procedures include the use of dog methodology, like I talked about with the wind farm, where it's just in there like, hey, dogs are great at this. Yes, use dogs if you can to monitor for this. That's just going to explode the demand for dogs as those SOPs get we get more of them. And then because there's also a bigger field, I'm really looking forward to the opportunity to team up even more on larger efforts. We've teamed up with Chiron Canine, Paul Bunker, to work in Lao looking for the very endangered sow law. And I love that, getting to work with others from other organizations. And I see only more of that happening in the future. So wherever the future, suddenly I can't, there we go. So yeah, we'll see if my predictions hold, but thanks for being interested and on the boat with us, and let's all go floating off into the next 25.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amy. That was an amazing summary and history, and I can't wait to see what we all can accomplish together in the future for conservation. So very exciting. Thank you everyone for attending today. And if you're catching us on the recording, we appreciate you too. Know that this work can only happen with the support of our community. So to everyone who has supported us throughout these 25 years, we are just so incredibly, incredibly grateful. We do have our website listed there. So more information if you want to learn about some of our projects happening, our dogs, our people, our work, lots of information there. And then I also have our email there. So feel free to reach out with any questions or follow up you like that. Just a reminder, all donations are being matched through tonight. And then please do follow us on our social media pages as well. Share those. We always try to post a lot of updates that way. And if you haven't already subscribed to our newsletter, you can do that on our website and consider attending any of our events. Our next upcoming event is our Canine Classic, and that's a dog-friendly fundraising run at Paws Up. And there's lots of prizes and food and a super dog, just adventurous time. And then there's virtual options as well. So even if you can't make it out to Montana at the end of August, we can still celebrate together. So at this point, I'm going to open it up for questions. So I do have a few questions for you, Amy. The first question that came in is, how many target odors do you typically have your dogs imprinted on?
Yeah, so I think our record holder is still Wicket at 32 targets. We have some of our dogs getting to retirement age being sub 10, 6, 8, 9. So we just manage that based on per dog. Some dogs seem to want to go a little deeper. maybe a little slower to pick it up, so those dogs we won't add as many targets on. Others just learn really quickly, and it's up to us to manage. Like, okay, well, they know these 20 other odors, so can they work on this project? And that's another big reason why some dogs will only know a few targets, is if it would make it difficult to work on other targets.
Excellent. Let me just move my screen here so I make sure I have the questions. There were two questions that came in that are kind of along a similar line. What is the best way to transition your career towards working dogs for conservation? This is from someone speaking who is a TWS certified wildlife biologist. And then kind of related to that, another person asks, how do you get your foot in the door to working in the canine conservation field? This person is interested in working with dogs for a career and looking where to start.
Yeah, it's I think one thing that's in your favor right now is that we are beyond the period where the handful of conservation dog organizations didn't want people with experience, because it's better, there's an idea of like, I can take in your experience and then um, work with that, or is it going to seem like a hindrance? Because what if you learn things the way we want to teach it, and now we'd have to undo it? I would say for the most part, everybody now is like, great, people are going to come with experience. Some might not have any, but some will, and that's fine and a good thing. And so if you get started in and have any experience, I would say Wind Farm is a likely place to start. There's contracts posted for wind farm work on job boards, late winter, early spring frequently. That does seem like a good place to start. And if you get in there, have your own dog, and you get in on that work, it now won't be a deficit. You can apply for jobs later, and they won't be like, oh shoot, but you already did dog work and we just want someone from scratch. So at least that's a good thing. It still is um, tricky in that it's still a niche field, so there's not a lot of job openings, but I would um, take the opportunity to uh, learn some about dog behavior if you don't already know about it. Get a dog, do some research on what makes a good working dog, and get your own dog and start training them and playing with them. And then you're an asset of, I can come with a dog with some capacity. It's tricky for sure. Still niche.
Excellent. And then kind of ties right into the next question, Amy. What related to canine selection? So, what barriers in canine selection are the most troublesome to Working Dogs for Conservation's mission at present? And then this is another question. You can probably answer them both. They're kind of related. What is the best screening criteria, especially with rescue dogs where history is limited and environment might not be ideal?
Yeah. Um, I'll start with the second one. I'm a big believer that the dogs they'll show you what you need to know about them. So it does not bother me one iota to not have like raised a dog from scratch, and to just meet them as a young adult in a shelter. The other thing is that many dogs will kind of put on their best face, like, here's who I am in the shelter, and then they're going to change anyway. So once the environment changes, they change. So you can look at a selection video on Rescues to the Rescue. That's an entity that we started with International Fund for Animal Welfare, to try to connect shelters that have possible appropriate working dogs with people who are looking for them. And there's a selection video there that's a start. And then, but if you're going to test a dog in that way, definitely um, talk with the shelter and see if you can short-term foster or have some kind of trial period, because you do want to do that and see them in different environments and also assess them for, other attributes of sociability, and just know what you're getting into. Um, the barrier for dog selection, it used to be, I'm trying to think what it is now. All of our staff are just always like online with all their feelers out. There's so many more avenues. There's Facebook groups for like adoptable sport and working dogs. And so those are good avenues. So it used to just be finding the dogs with the drives we needed, but now there's just more avenues out there. So I'm struggling to think of like what the the biggest barrier is right now. And I'm not thinking of them. I feel like it's easier to come by dogs these days than it ever has been.
Excellent. We certainly do love dogs. I love that the opportunities have expanded for them in such a wonderful way. Your next question is a one for me. It's where can we go to see recorded programs you have missed? So yes, it is our Dog Days of Summer free webinar series. This is the last one in the series. They have all been recorded. So if you've registered for them, you will get a recording emailed to you. It's just a slight delay. It takes a while to like buffer the video and make sure we can post it to where it needs to go. And then, so everyone who's registered will get a copy of it, but then it will be made public and available probably in about a week or so on our YouTube channel. And then if you go to our website and register for our newsletter, we'll send you an announcement when that's public as well. So the best ways to keep up to date on what we're doing is our social media pages and being in our email, our newsletter list. And then we'll keep you up to date on all of those things. So excellent.
Crystal, can I throw in one more
Yeah.
thing I thought of for people getting into the field? I should have this should have come to mind sooner, because I just re-upped my membership. But look at Conservation Dog Alliance. It is just a practitioner association, started last year, I think. And it's where practitioners can join together and bounce off ideas and, be a resource for each other. And people who just want to get into the field are certainly welcome there too. And so that's a good place. I have definitely seen people posting we're hiring there. So that should have been at the top of my list. And here it is, squeaking itself in the door before we finish up.
You covered a few other topics today, though, so I think that's okay.
Thanks.
Excellent. Well, with that, this does conclude our talk for today and our full webinar series. So it's been a total blast. We hope you've all enjoyed it as much as we have. So just watch your email next week. We'll send a copy. And then also there's going to be a drawing for one lucky winner. So we have a number randomized drawing, and I'll email that individual personally. You're going to get a swag bag with a bunch of Working Dogs for Conservation gear. So congratulations to that lucky individual in advance once I select your number. And I believe that's all. Have the most wonderful rest of your day, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Bye.
Thank you.